We're back out here once again, and today we're talking about some proven baits and presentations that work for me year after year as September rolls around. Stick around, you don't want to miss this one.
Oh, there we are. Oh, that's nice. Oh, that's a nice one. Stay down, stay down. Oh, there he goes. Ooh, he's pulling some line. Where are you going, buddy? Where are you going? Where are you going? Ooh, yeah, he's nice.
And here is this video's featured comment. Congratulations! If you would like to have a chance to have your comment featured in an upcoming video, all you've got to do is leave a comment. And now, on with the video. Welcome back to Lowbrow Fishing. And now that we've officially hit the month of September, that fall transition is starting to show itself for much of the country. Nighttime temperatures are starting to drop just a little bit, which in turn is bringing that water temperature down. That causes those bass to start to group up and head shallow. That's why we call it the fall transition. Those bass are transitioning from their summer pattern into their fall pattern and the fall feed. Now, we as bass anglers can use the right presentations and the right techniques to take advantage of that transition. And to that end, I went back and I looked through several years of videos of me catching fish during the month of September. And what I noticed was a consistent set of baits that worked for me year in and year out. Now, those bass may adjust where they are in the water a little bit due to lake pressure, due to lake conditions, fishing pressure, what have you. But the baits that I was using to catch those bass, that remained consistent. And it all starts with this guy right here, a lipless crankbait. This is a Cotton Cordell Super Spot. And this is that modified one. This is the one that I've drilled into and filled it with super glue and baking soda, which hardens almost like a rock. And that causes those rattles to tone down just a little bit. It's great for a pressured fishery. Now, I'm going to do something like that with a cheaper bait. I'm not going to do it on something that costs $10, $11, like, a 6 cents Quake 70 or something like that. But a bait that's like $3, I have no problem doing that because, in case I screw it up, in case I crack it. But if you want to try something like this, make sure you exercise extreme caution because you're drilling into a small piece of plastic. Chances are you're going to screw it up the first couple of times you try it. But when you do try it and you do get it right, it has such an effect on that bait, and it allows me to work that bait in different ways in different waters. This I'm working in a little bit deeper water. I'm going in about that 12 to 15 foot area. When I cast it out, I let it sink just for a little bit, and then I'm bringing it in on a fairly steady retrieve. I'll stop, let the slack get in that line, and then I'll give it a couple of jerks, almost like I would a jerkbait. And when I do that, I get some really monster strikes. So give that a try. Now I'm fishing this on a straight casting combo. This is a 6:4 to 1 gear ratio bait cast reel, and this keeps me honest. This allows me to focus on each retrieve. I'm not zoning out. I'm not thinking about the next cast or the next bait. I'm focused on the retrieve that I'm doing, and that allows me to maximize my efficiency, which allows me to maximize my fish catches. Now this rod, it's a 7-foot medium heavy with a more moderate fast tip. It's a softer tip, and I like that, especially for fishing troubled baits. That way, those bass, they get a chance to inhale that bait a little bit more before I start the side set to bring the fish to the boat. So instead of jerking the bait out of their mouth, I generally get pretty good purchase. This has got those micro guides on it, which makes it perfect as a casting setup. I'm not using this for worms. I'm not using this for jigs, only for lipless crankbaits and some small square bills. Now I've got 10 to 12 pound fluorocarbon line on here, but you use what works for your area. Lipless crankbait in September, I'm telling you what, it is money. Now, next up, we've got this guy right here. This is just a small square bill. This is a 6th Sense Crush. And I've got it in that black and blue pattern, well, because we've had a lot of rain out here lately. And this has a hard contrast under that murky and stained water. Now this I'm actually fishing a little bit closer to the bank in about that maybe 7 to 8 foot depth range, because this only goes about 5 to 7 feet in that area, depending on what type of crankbait you're doing, depending on the setup, depending on the retrieve. Most of your smaller square bills will go anywhere from 3 to 7 feet. This one I think goes 5 to 7. And it works. I can use this paralleling the bank. I can use this right along laydowns. I can use this in vegetation right along those submerged creeks. You know, it works great in those areas. And while you can use a square bill in the spring, you can use it in much the same way as you would during the fall. I use this and I've been getting great bites on it year in and year out. If that water's more clear, if I've got more sunshine, then I'm going with a more traditional shad pattern. And I might actually upsize the size of the square bill that I'm using. But when I'm starting out, I start out with a smaller version and I adjust the color and the type based on the water that I'm working. I've been working some stained water lately, so that's where this guy has come into play. If that water is more clear, if maybe there's a little bit less wind or what have you, then I'm going to be switching to something of a more shad pattern. And that's what's been working for me. Now, don't be afraid to work this near the bank. They come through vegetation, they come through slop better than you think, because they kind of come through the water like that with that bill down. And especially something like timber or trees or something like that, twigs or brush that's under the water. If you feel like you're getting hung up, just let it sit for a second and that bait will rise back to the surface and you can keep right on going. If you feel like you've got it hung up on some vegetation, give it a good hard tug. Now, a lot of times, whenever you do that, ripping that bait free from that vegetation, you'll get some really crazy hard strikes, because that sudden change of movement, that sudden change of direction really activates those bass, and you can get them to just inhale your bait. This right here, you know, don't sleep on a square bill. Now, this setup that I'm using, this is actually a 7:5 to 1 gear ratio reel. And I want that faster gear ratio because this dude, I'm actually working pretty quick. I'm working it a lot faster than I would that lipless. That lipless, I'm kind of working it at a medium meandering pace. This dude here, I'm going much, much faster. And this 7:5 to 1 gear ratio reel allows me to do that. I'll give a few good stiff cranks and I'll let it sit. And then I'll give a few stiff cranks and I'll let it sit. And I'm trying to not have any rhyme or reason to how I'm working that bait. I'm not trying to have a steady pattern. Just crank, pause, crank, pause. And on that pause, that's when I'm getting exploded on, and that rod just loads up. And this is a 7.2 medium heavy. This allows me to really sail that little guy out there. This thing doesn't hardly weigh anything. And I've got 12-pound or 10-pound fluorocarbon on this. And I can really chuck that bait as far as I need to, because on my fishery, the waters are so pressured, I need to get that bait away from me, especially on days when there's a lot of other anglers that are out on the water. Again, don't be afraid to work that near the bank. It's a lot better near the bank than you think it is. So even if you're a bank angler, give a small square bill a try. You will definitely be pleased with how that works out for you. Now, lastly, we're going to be talking about a couple of different finesse type presentations. And this I can work pretty much in any water. And that is, if I can get it over here, the old tail spinner worm. It's just a Texas rigged worm, and it has a Colorado blade on a hitchhiker on it. Now, as you can see, I've got that dark black blue flake worm because, as I've just was talking about, we've got a lot of stain in the water, and this really helps. And right there, I'm just using a 1/4 ounce bullet weight, which is enough to get it down to where I want to. This I've been working in anywhere in that 10 to 15 foot range, which is about average for the water depth that I normally work. Again, this is just a 4/0 EWG, but the whole key to the deal is right there. That guy right there, that spinner on the end. And what that allows it to do is that allows it to have some thump and flash as it's coming through the water. And I don't necessarily have to drag it. Although when I do drag it, I get some monster strikes as I would a Texas rig, even though it's a bit of a different presentation, at least to the bass from their perspective. But one thing that I really like to do is I like to pop that rod up, give it a few cranks, and then let it sit. Dead stick, 5-10 seconds, pop it back up, swim it for just a little bit, and then let it sit. And then I can continue to drag it if I want to. Varying up that retrieve gives me so much versatility and allows me to work the bait in different ways and make it seem more alive, which is very appealing to those bass. That tail spinner worm has been something that I've been using for a few years now, and I've caught some very nice fish on it. And I can do it close to the bank. I can do it under flooded brush. I can do it out in the middle of the water. Because as we roll along from September, those bass are going to be going from deeper to shallower. So I might want to start out in a little bit deeper water. If you're working from the bank, maybe try to make some longer casts out into deeper water just to see what you can get. And I'm telling you, something like that tail spinner worm, now it doesn't have to be a black and blue worm. It can be whatever color is working best on your fishery. But for me, with the stay in water, that's what I'm working with. It's a visual thing to give those bass something to key off on when they go to inhale it. Otherwise, I feel like they just attack that blade. You've got to be aware of that. The bass, they like to attack that blade when they see it. So a lot of times you'll feel like you get a really big strike and you come back and the blade is gone because they've taken the back half of the worm. So keep that in mind. You don't want that to happen. And the way that you try to prevent that is making sure that it's the worm that they are attracted to. The blade gets their attention and brings them to it, but it's the worm themselves that they want to bite. So work your bait in such a way that that is what they're generating strikes on. Now, lastly, well, we've got a real true finesse rig right here, and that is good old Waco rig, or you can just use a regular wacky rig. Either way, near the bank, up near that flooded brush, up near that timber, up near docks or rocks or what have you, this around structure and cover is money. This is going to be the deal. If you only take one bait away from what I'm talking about, how I'm fishing, then go with a finesse presentation like a Waco rig or a wacky rig, a weightless wacky rig, because that slow fall, that slow flutter, that can just incite so many powerful bites. And again, I'm working it right up near the bank, or I'm working it, really shallow water. If I'm in the boat, I may not be in the area of the bank. I may be a few casts away from the bank in a hydrilla flat, and I'm fishing it in those gaps in the hydrilla. But still, it's only 2 or 3 feet of water, and I'm working it essentially the same way. Bait hits the water, and it kind of floats down nice and slow. I give it a couple of twitches with my rod. It'll jerk up, and it kind of twirls as it does. You guys have seen the other underwater footage that I've done with the Waco rig, and it's very enticing that way. Now, if I'm working a wacky rig, I'm essentially doing the same thing. If I'm not working it right up against the bank, if I'm away from the bank, I'm still fishing more shallow water, and I'm fishing the gaps in that vegetation. So, and I still get really great strikes. Just because it's got an open hook on it, that doesn't mean that I can't fish it in those areas and have those open pockets where I'm putting that bait be very, very productive. So don't shy away from a wacky rig. It's a productive bait all year long, but right now is really when you want to have one tied on. So there you have it. Some of my favorite baits and presentations that work year in and year out during the month of September. Whether you're fishing deep or whether you're fishing shallow, give these a try. And I'm telling you, you are definitely going to like the results. Thanks for watching Lowbrow Fishing. We'll catch you in the next one.